Howdy, my name is Evelyn Korstad, and for this writing project, I'll be taking a deep dive into the Grimm Brothers fairy tale titled Hansel and Gretel and how it compares to the movie Heretic. So Heretic is a movie that was released in 2024 by, Scott Beck and Brian Woods, and it's definitely in the horror genre, so I was really interested to see how I could draw comparisons and find common themes in the characters and the events that happen in this movie and how that compares to the fairy tale Hansel and Gretel. Also, just a side note, if you see me glancing up at my computer, I just have a few bullet points that I want to hit as I talk about this topic with you. So first things first, I want to provide you a little bit of context by briefly going over the plot of both movies, or one movie and then the fairy tale Hansel and Gretel. So with Hansel and Gretel, this one's pretty popular. Hansel and Gretel, brother and sister, they are abandoned in the woods and they stumble upon a cottage made of delicious sweets and bread. They start munching on this enticing, delicious cottage when an old woman, a witch, traps them by acting like a sweet old lady and luring them inside, and basically throws them in a cellar and plans to fatten them up to eat them. They ultimately are able to outsmart this witch, this old lady, and they escape and live happily ever after. So jumping over to Heretic, this movie starts off with two girls from the religion Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they are doing house calls where they go and talk to people about their religion. So they stumble upon this one house of Mr. Reed, and they're invited inside with the promise of some blueberry pie, and they're told that this man's wife will be joining them as well as another safety point for them. And they take a seat and talk with him, and he's very open, very kind, and he seems eager to learn more about the religion, and they just think, like, this is great, this is the easiest house call they've ever made. But then it starts to get a little bit fishy. His locks automatically lock on his front door, and they're unable to leave, and he continues to lead them on and say, oh, my wife's just in the other room, she'll be here any minute, she's just baking that apple pie. And whenever the wife never comes, they get more and more skeptical, and it becomes revealed that there was no wife and that he lit a blueberry pie candle to deceive them into thinking there was a blueberry pie. But at this point, it becomes apparent that he has trapped them and that he can do whatever he wants with them. So this obviously creates a very uneasy, tense vibe where they are worried that they're literally going to be murdered, and he starts prying them about their religion and basically reveals that he's a fanatic and that he is interested in looking at whether religions are even true. Are they all just cult followings? Are they all based on fake hearings of fake prophets in history? And he is basically trying to break down these girls' faith and get them to admit that their religion, that they don't actually believe in it. And he does this in a pretty cruel way. He sends them deeper into the house where he sets up a staged prophet experience. So they don't know this in the beginning, but he basically has slaves that he forces to perform as prophets. He starves, tortures them, he keeps them in freezing cold temperatures and treats them completely inhumane. And basically when the girls see this prophet, they see him feed the prophet poison, to which the prophet dies, and then supposedly the prophet rises again and shares with them their afterlife experience, to which the prophet tells them that they saw a white light and that it's not real. Whenever the prophet says this, the manipulator man, Mr. Reed, becomes very uneasy and he starts to seem a little bit panicky, like maybe that wasn't part of the plan. And he starts to spiral and like go off on this other tangent about how they're in simulation theory, just still trying to play mind games on them. And he eventually stabs and kills one of the sisters. Her name was Sister Barnes, and he cuts her birth control device out of her arm and shows it to the still surviving sister, Sister Paxton, and tries to convince her that this is proof of simulation theory, that the girl was all part of a simulation. And instead of blindly believing what this man was trying to shove down our throats, Sister Paxton kind of plays into his game and starts asking questions and kind of picking apart his logic and finding the holes in the theories he's proposing. And she says, "No, I believe that's a contraception device. I believe that you didn't really bring that prophet back. I believe that you switched the bodies." And this ends up being true later on. And ultimately, she stabs him, he stabs her, and the original sister, Sister Barnes, who we thought was dead in the beginning, raises up, and with her last breath, she whacks Mr. Reed for his final blow and kills him. And Sister Paxton, though pretty fatally wounded with the stab wound, she escapes, makes it out to the streets, and the ending is left open-ended. It's up to our interpretation whether she finds help, whether she rescues the rest of those prophets who are being tortured, or if she dies and leaves this all to be discovered, maybe never. So now that we have a little bit of context, I'd like to dig into some of the similarities that I found between the characters and the themes in this movie and fairy tale. So one big overarching theme is obviously religion. So in Hansel and Gretel, the brother and sister kind of frequently mention to each other, like, "Oh, just believe that God has got us, he will help us through this," and they don't give up faith. And that's similar to Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton, how even though they're having these mind games played on them, they don't give up their faith, and they continue to think critically and think skeptically, and they maintain their faith just like Hansel and Gretel did. So at the very beginning, before entering the threshold of their killer's den, basically, Hansel and Gretel are in dark, scary, lonely woods where they have a lot of fear. And in Heretic, Sister Paxton and Barnes are out in the cold, freezing rain. And these are both very uncomfortable situations and environments that allow them to be more susceptible to the seemingly good environments that Mr. Reed and the old woman propose. So obviously, if these kids are scared and in lonely woods, they're gonna be super enticed by a warm bed and a nice meal. And then same with the sisters. They're out in the cold rain, they smell blueberry pie. Why not go in to this strange man's house? Additionally, the manipulators both are laying it on thick. So with the man, he continues to deceive them and says that there's that blueberry pie coming when it's really just a candle. He insists constantly that his wife is coming, just keeps reassuring them, making them feel safe. And with the old woman, she is doing similar things. She's laying it on thick. She's giving these kids pancakes, giving them the warmest, coziest beds, and they're both behaving as if they're very kind-hearted people, when in reality they have some very devious, evil plans in mind for these children that they've lured into their dens. So something that I found interesting was that the sisters had both left their bikes locked up by the streets, and with Hansel and Gretel, Hansel had left breadcrumbs whenever they initially went out and were abandoned in the woods. So the bikes were almost like the breadcrumbs in that they would have been a way that someone driving by to look for them could have seen that they were there. But just like the breadcrumbs failed from the birds eating them, the bikes failed as an indicator of their presence at that house. Because when their pastor came to look for them, the man Mr. Reed had already taken their bikes and hidden them, causing them to not be obviously found at his house. So that was interesting that those were two setups that allowed the children in both stories to kind of be lost and not be found by people if they were looking for them. So I also found it very interesting that Sister Paxton and Gretel, when they're faced with these dire situations where they are literally about to be murdered, they refuse to give up hope, and they continue to use their smarts to question and outsmart their manipulators, because they know that this is how their minds work. So Gretel, instead of stepping into the furnace when the old witch asks her to test to make sure it's hot enough for the brother to be cooked, when in reality she was going to cook the girl too, the girl, instead of listening to that directive, she says, "Oh, but how do I get into the oven?" And with that, the old woman kind of annoyedly sticks her head in and is like, "Oh, this is how you do it. See, it's plenty big enough." And the girl then goes and pushes the old woman in, closes the hatch, and that's how they kill the witch and get away. With Heretic, Sister Paxton continues to question the man when he proposes the simulation theory, and when he starts spiraling and like creating more and more deceptions to try to convince her of this other reality he's proposing. But she continues to be like, but that doesn't make sense, and like, why are you saying that? And she pokes around enough to where she breaks him and realizes that he is lying completely, and she's able to distract him in this thought process enough that she's able to stab him and get away. Yeah, so one area that they definitely deviate in both stories is that in Hansel and Gretel, we get the classic, they lived happily ever after. They get away from the old witch, they fill their pockets with loot from her house, and they go home and live wonderful lives with their father, who's happy to see them, and their evil stepmother even dies. So it's like perfect ending for them. With Sister Paxton and Barnes, it is not as good. Sister Barnes obviously dies. Mr. Reed dies, but Sister Paxton is able to escape the house through a vent, though she is like pretty fatally wounded with that stab wound. And we are left to interpretation in the ending of the movie of whether we believe she maybe finds a cop on the road to help her, or if she dies there and never makes it out. So that can be seen as kind of a bittersweet ending, so you don't really know what happens. And we also don't know if anybody goes back to save all those prophets that were being abused by Mr. Reed for his own manipulative story building that he was using. So yeah, it was pretty cool getting to see how these characters were so similar. Mr. Reed and the old woman witch both being manipulators and putting on this good face in order to lure children in to their demise. And then the children being pretty steadfast and outsmarting their manipulators to get out of these situations, and thinking ahead enough to not just blindly follow directives, but be able to think around the problem and around the manipulator. So thank you for listening to me talking about the comparison between these two, the movie and the fairy tale. I hope you enjoyed hearing about it, and I'll see you next time.